Hello everyone, my name is Eric. I'm a limited licensed master social worker and psychotherapist. I've been working with children, youth, and adults for 10 years. On this week's episode of So, You Want to Learn Psychology? We're making a bit of a departure from Jung's life and work to focus on the work of another psychoanalyst whose contributions to modern psychology are so vast that without her work, psychology as we know it would probably not exist in the way we think about it today. From basic anxiety, to tyranny of the should, the real and ideal self-image, and her penetrating work on narcissism, these are just a few of her contributions that she's made to our modern psychology, and she even went on to found the American Institute for Psychoanalysis in 1941. A veritable icon in psychoanalytic history, for better or worse, Karen Horney's work is praised by many, such as myself, and mocked, misunderstood, and discredited by others. Once, I was chatting with a colleague of mine and we were discussing some of our personal influences and favorite works on psychology. When I brought up our inner conflicts, my colleague scoffed and said, "Really, Karen Horney?" in a condescending tone. I thought to myself, here we go, another person who has never actually read Karen Horney. Neurosis and Human Growth is a tiny green book with huge implications for modern psychotherapy. Along with Our Inner Conflicts and The Neurotic Personality of Our Time, which are two of my other favorites, this little 350-page book contains such a depth of information on the development of personal psychology, from health to neurosis, that I think any practicing psychotherapist should read this book at the very least. If you're a practicing psychotherapist, thinking of becoming a therapist, or just generally interested in psychology and you haven't read this book, well, prepare to have your mind considerably opened. We begin with a quote. "You need not, in fact, cannot teach an acorn to grow into an oak tree, but when given the chance, its intrinsic potentialities will develop." This metaphor is the basic underlying principle of psychological development. Whether an acorn grows into an oak tree because it is achieving self-actualization, because it is its archetypal destiny to do so, or because the oak tree is the ideal self-image makes no difference. The key here is that this process of transformation is not the consequence of learning how to transform. It is simply something that happens when nature is left alone. Part of Horney's revolutionary perspective was that she was one of the first, along with Erich Fromm and Harry Stack Sullivan and others, to emphasize the role of the environment on a person's psychological development. A healthy crop will not grow in infertile soil. The sociological insight was largely ignored by early psychoanalysis, probably because early psychoanalysis was more geared towards the middle class. Their lives were, at least materially, comfortable, and so no one really recognized that their environment could have such a profound impact on their psychological development. That's another topic for another episode. Anyway, another one of her major contributions is the idea that people develop psychologically in three different directions. They either move towards people in healthy or pathological ways, away from people in healthy or pathological ways, or against people, which is generally understood as pathological. She writes, "The three moves toward, against, and away from others therefore constitute a conflict, his basic conflict with others. In time, he tries to solve it by making one of these moves consistently predominant, tries to make his prevailing attitude one of compliance, or aggressiveness, or aloofness." I see this in psychotherapy with all of my patients. Everyone's personality is a little different, but the basic relational pattern is a primary unconscious conflict in nearly everyone I've ever worked with. The self-sacrificing tend to move towards people, seeking love, closeness, intimacy, affection, but are easily burned by less thoughtful people in their lives. The antisocial, narcissistic, and self-righteous types tend to move against people. They are the angry and aggressive types that have strong opinions about others, very strong values, and an inclination to viciously defend against anything that threatens their sense of self that they've worked so hard to construct. And the introverted, anxious, and melancholic types that generally move away from people, wondering what it feels like to not be alone, all the while unable to make the necessary effort towards becoming more social due to the lack of desire, lack of skill, or inability to see beyond what their pessimistic attitude permits. All of this is related to the basic anxiety of being a separate individual amongst the rest of collective humanity. To be separate makes us anxious, and to feel safe, we usually remain where we are. Don't wander off. Stay right there, we tell the curious and danger-prone child. There is safety in staying where you are. There is comfort in knowing that if I'm already lost, at least I can stay where I am, where I know I won't be going in the wrong direction. But as our psychology develops without our consent and without our input, we tend to move, psychologically, in a direction regardless of whether we make a conscious choice or not. Most of the time, our decisions depend on what makes us feel the most safe. For a person moving towards others, safety is in the presence of others. For those who move against, safety is being an individual and showing strength. And for those who move away, safety is in being avoidant, paranoid, and separate. So far, all of this makes a lot of sense, and it can help characterize and compartmentalize a person's interpersonal patterns and help us distinguish how best to change the way they relate to others. But neurosis in and of itself is a conflict. Inherent in every neurosis is the lack of insight and self-reflection that make changing behavior possible. Horney writes, every neurotic at bottom is loath to recognize limitations to what he expects of himself and what is possible to attain. She continues in more detail. Every neurotic, even though he may pass superficially as healthy, is averse to checking with the evidence when it comes to his particular illusions about himself. And he must be so because they would collapse if he did. The attitude towards external laws and regulations vary, but he always tends to deny laws operating within himself, refuses to see the inevitability of cause and effect in psychic matters, or of one factor following the other or reinforcing the other. Considering these facts, it seems inevitable that man is uncertain about his limitations and, hence, easily sets his goals either too low or too high. It's usually not my job to decide whether goals for personality change are too high or too low, but I do offer insight into what is probably realistic to expect from psychotherapy. A lot of neurotic people have this misconception that they can eventually achieve a life that is free from suffering. This is never explicitly stated, but remains an unconscious and neurotic belief for most. Here's an example. Many of my anxious patients are looking for a way out of anxiety, which isn't possible. Anxiety will persist. What is possible is to change our relationship to anxiety, change how we respond, and increase our ability to cope with it. Some of my trauma patients wish they could just forget about it, which is something, I remind them, is likely impossible short of getting a lobotomy. But what we can do is try to process those memories, the feelings and sensations, reconstruct a narrative that is not so scary, and integrate those traumas as to promote post-traumatic growth instead of stress. The key here is that these personalities unconsciously aim too high, and in doing so, they set themselves up for a fall like the fateful Icarus. Not from the conscious hubris, but from an unconscious wish to prove themselves stronger than nature. It is amazing how obtuse otherwise intelligent patients can become when it is a matter of seeing the inevitability of cause and effect in psychic matters. I'm thinking of rather self-evident connections such as these. If we want to achieve something, we must put in work. If we want to become independent, we must strive toward assuming responsibility for ourselves. Or, so long as we are arrogant, we will be vulnerable. Or, so long as we do not love ourselves, we cannot possibly believe that others love us, and must by necessity be suspicious toward any assertion of love. Patients presented with such a sequence of cause and effect may start to argue, become befogged or evasive. These are all examples of the neurotic beliefs and expectations that drive bullish attempts to overcome the nature of things and assert their position over and above the psychic law of cause and effect. The recognition of any necessity applying to themselves, therefore, would actually pull them down from their lofty world into actuality, where they would be subject to the same natural laws as anybody else. And it is this need to eliminate necessity from their lives which turns into a claim. In analysis, this shows in their feeling entitled to be above the necessity of changing. However, even if a person is aware of having certain claims, he is never aware of his claims being unwarranted or irrational. Actually, any doubt of their validity would mean the first step toward undermining them. As long, therefore, as they are vitally important to him, the neurotic must build up in his mind an airtight case in order to make them entirely legitimate. He must feel thoroughly convinced of their being fair and just. The patient in analysis goes to a great length to prove that he expects only what is coming to him. But what does it do to a person when he recognizes that he cannot measure up to his inner dictates? To anticipate the answer briefly, then he starts to hate and to despise himself. She continues, "Indeed, this is the essential characteristic of every neurotic. He is at war with himself. However, we do not hate ourselves because we are worthless, but because we are driven to reach beyond ourselves, seeking the idealized self-image. The hatred results from the discrepancy between what I would be and what I am. The discrepancy between what I would be and what I am also manifests as the parallel distinction between what are psychological needs and what the neurotic turns into claims of entitlement. As always happens in neurosis, needs turn to claims, which means that he feels entitled to having all of these goods come to him. The needs for love, affection, understanding, and sympathy, or help, turn into I am entitled to love, affection, understanding, sympathy. I am entitled to having things done for me. I am entitled not to the pursuit of happiness, but to have happiness fall into my lap. It goes without saying that most of these claims, as claims, remain unconscious. It is a hard truth to recognize that the reality is that whether our psychological needs are met or not is neither inherently good, bad, unjust, or immoral. While they are our needs, we still need to work and act right to attain them. It's not anyone else's responsibility to make sure our needs are met. They don't owe us, just as we don't owe them. I've encountered this in my practice while working with men who feel entitled to be treated a certain way by women. I've even worked with my share of incels who harbor this unconscious claim. The amount of depth psychological insight contained in Horney's work is immense, to the point where I would argue that reading any of her books is tantamount to an entire year's worth of a college psychology course. The quotes we've mentioned thus far in the video are only from the first 150 pages of the book. And to give you some idea, I usually annotate and highlight everything that I think is important in books, and it's not an exaggeration when I say that I've virtually highlighted something on every page of this one. To go further in depth would require me to make a 30 or 40 minute video, which isn't something I'm interested in doing unless the viewers ask for it. Instead, I would rather encourage the curious and thoughtful watcher of this video to take it upon themselves to read the works of Karen Horney. I guarantee you will learn something new about yourself, and hopefully you can apply what you've learned to your own life as well as the lives of others. I intend to come back and do more videos on Horney's contributions to psychology and psychoanalysis, and in the future I will dedicate videos specifically to our inner conflicts and the neurotic personality of our time. As always, thank you for your support. Until next time.